No one expected the kingdom of Jerusalem to survive that morning, not even some of its own knights. When the first riders returned from the Jordan Valley at dawn, their message was simple and terrifying. Saladin was coming with 35,000 men, and all King Baldwin had was 700 knights and a few hundred infantry scattered across hills and fortresses. To most, it wasn't a battle, it was a funeral waiting to happen. The young king, Baldwin IV, rode slowly before his men near the slopes of Belvoir Castle. His body trembled under golden lamellar armor, not from fear, but from the disease that was eating him alive, leprosy. Beneath the steel gauntlet his fingers were already numb. His face was covered by a carefully crafted mask. The world did not need to see what the illness had done to him, but his voice still carried like a war horn across the rocky valley. "Knights of Jerusalem," he called, "you were not born to die as dust beneath a tyrant. You were chosen to stand here, between our kingdom and the darkness that wishes to swallow it. Today we deny that darkness." Some bowed their heads, others crossed themselves. A few whispered prayers through clenched teeth, not for victory, but for courage. One of them, a veteran hospitaller named Sir Landry Diavolers, tightened the strap beneath his shield and muttered, 700 against 35,000. God, either grant us a miracle or grant us a worthy death. His squire, barely more than a boy, swallowed hard. "Do you think we can win, sir?" Landry didn't answer at first. He only looked at the distant dust rising on the horizon, the march of an entire empire. Banners of green and black shimmered under the rising sun. Drums rumbled like thunder. The line of cavalry stretched farther than the eye could follow. "Win," he finally said. "That depends on how long we stand." Behind them, priests carried relics. A splinter of the true cross held high, its presence both comfort and burden. Losing it would mean humiliation. Losing this battle could mean the end of the Crusader kingdom. A scout galloped in, breathless. "My king, the Mamluks lead the vanguard. Saladin advances with them. They expect us to run." Baldwin didn't move, didn't flinch. "Good," he whispered. "Then we shall do the opposite." He raised his sword, the signal. Horn blasts echoed across the hills. 700 lances lowered, sharp as judgment, steady as faith. And as the shadow of Saladin's massive army grew across the earth, Baldwin gave the order that would define the day. "Forward and do not yield." The impossible battle had begun. The ground shook long before steel met steel. Saladin's vanguard, elite Mamluk cavalry, surged forward like a tidal wave of horses, curved blades, and thunderous hooves. Their war drums hammered the air, and their battle cries rolled across the valley like the roar of a storm. Dust rose in thick clouds, swallowing sunlight and turning the field into a blur of motion and shadow. Sir Landry's horse trembled beneath him, sensing the coming collision. Sweat ran beneath his helm. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with the terrible clarity soldiers feel right before death becomes real. Beside him, his young squire whispered, "Holy Mother, they look endless." "They are," Landry muttered. "So don't look at all of them. Look only at the rider in front of you, and kill him." The boy swallowed and nodded, knuckles white on his shield. King Baldwin raised his sword. Not high, not dramatically, just enough for his knights to see. It was enough. 700 knights lowered their lances as one. The formation tightened. Shields overlapped, armor locked shoulder to shoulder, hooves synchronized like the beating heart of a living, armored beast. Behind them, the infantry braced, pikes angled, crossbow strings drawn, waiting for the perfect, agonizing moment. A hospitaller commander shouted down the line, "Remember, do not break formation. If one falls, close the gap. Hold." Then the world turned into lightning. The first impact was bone-shattering. Lances punching through lamellar armor, riders thrown backward, horses crushed beneath weight and momentum. The sound was catastrophic. Steel screaming, flesh tearing, men screaming prayers and curses in equal measure. Landry's lance shattered against a Mamluk's chest, driving the man backward off his saddle. Before the splintered would left his hand, Landry was already drawing his sword. His squire barely ducked a scimitar that flashed inches from his face. "Stay with me," Landry roared. The boy didn't answer, he simply fought. The Mamluks expected panic, chaos, retreat. Instead, they found a wall, unyielding, disciplined, methodical. Every knight fought in formation, shield to shield, refusing to scatter. From the rear, Baldwin shouted a command. "Forward! Just one pace." It sounded insane in the chaos, but that single step broke the rhythm of the Mamluks, forcing them backward, stealing their momentum. Saladin, watching from a ridge, narrowed his eyes. "This king," he murmured, "is far more dangerous than the reports claimed." The Mamluks regrouped for a second charge. The Crusaders reformed without hesitation, bloodied, breathless, but unbroken. And as horns sounded again, something impossible hung in the air. The mighty army of Islam had not broken them. Not yet, not even close. The second charge came faster, harder, more coordinated. Saladin's cavalry swept wide, circling like vultures waiting for a stumble, waiting for weakness. The Mamluk archers began firing, not in random volleys, but in perfectly timed arcs meant to blind, disrupt, and bleed the knights before the next collision. Arrows clattered against shields and helmets. Some found gaps, rings of mail, exposed joints, throats. A knight to Landry's left jerked violently as an arrow buried itself beneath his eye slit, dropping him instantly. His horse bolted forward riderless, crashing into the line. "Close the gap!" someone shouted. They did without hesitation. The formation remained intact. But every loss mattered. The air burned with dust and sweat. War cries collided with psalms. King Baldwin, nearly suffocating behind his metallic mask, forced his trembling body upright in the saddle. Pain radiated through his nerves like fire, but his voice stayed steady. "Hold the line," he commanded, lifting his sword again. "They cannot break what does not bend." His marshal, Reynold of Chatillon, scarred, unpredictable, hated by many, rode beside him, grinning like a wolf. "They think this is a normal field battle," Reynold growled. "Let them. When they commit fully, then we strike." Baldwin's tone sharpened. "Not before the signal. Not a heartbeat sooner." Their eyes locked, defiance meeting discipline. Yet even Reynold nodded. He understood the stakes. Below them, Landry saw the second wave forming and felt his heartbeat shift. Not fear, not panic, acceptance. "They're coming again," his squire whispered. Landry steadied his grip. "Good, we're still here." The Mamluks thundered forward. This time they split, the center hammering the knightly wall while flanking riders tried to crash into the infantry on the wings. The infantry braced pikes, and the first wave of horses impaled themselves in a horrific mix of flesh and iron. Screams tore through the ranks as riders flew forward, crushed beneath falling mounts. Crossbowmen fired point-blank into the chaos. "Reload now! Now!" shouted a sergeant. The second group of horsemen reached the center. Steel clashed yet again. Landry's shield took a scimitar blow that nearly dislocated his shoulder. His counterstrike was instinct, a brutal upward swing that caught his attacker under the chin, splitting bone and flesh. To his right, his squire lost his footing, almost dragged from the saddle. But Landry grabbed him by the arm, hauled him upright, and shoved him back into formation. "Eyes forward," he barked. "Live now, shake later." The squire nodded, face pale but resolve hardening. And then, far above the thunder of hooves, arrows, and battle cries, a distant horn sounded from behind Saladin's lines. A reserve force, fresh troops. Saladin was preparing to collapse the Crusaders in a final overwhelming push. A murmur ran through the Christian ranks. Not fear exactly, but something colder. The realization that the battle was about to turn from brutal to impossible. Up on the ridge, the king lowered his sword slightly, not in defeat but in calculation. "Marshal," Baldwin said quietly, "it's time." Reynold's grin widened. At last. The impossible victory, if it ever existed, now hung on one terrifying gamble. and Baldwin was about to reveal it. Reynald spurred his horse forward, armor rattling like a herald of violence. His face burned with anticipation, but Baldwin's weak, trembling hand rose, not to stop him, but to guide him. "Not yet," the king whispered through the metal mask. "Wait. Let them believe they have already broken us." Down below, the Crusader line strained. Wounded horses screaming, shields splintering, men fighting breath by breath. The flanking Muslim reserve was now visible. Waves of cavalry sweeping around the formation with the confidence of hunters closing in for the kill. Landry saw them appear and felt dread press against his ribs. "They're surrounding us," his squire said, voice shaking. Landry's answer was cold, controlled. "Then we hold tighter." But inside, even he wondered if this was the moment everything collapsed. Saladin watched from a ridge, calm, almost serene. His officers smiled, victory felt inevitable. 700 knights, surrounded and bleeding, against the vast machine of his army? Numbers alone spoke the ending. Yet Saladin's eyes narrowed. Something felt too orderly, too disciplined. These knights were not breaking. They were tightening like a coiled spring. Baldwin finally lowered his sword. Reynald turned to the knights positioned behind the main force, the ones sitting unervingly still throughout the chaos. 300 elite mounted knights, resting, untouched, waiting like wolves behind iron bars. Reynald roared, "Now, ready!" The reserve thundered forward. They didn't charge toward the center. They swept wide, hooking through gullies and broken terrain no sane cavalry commander would attempt. The maneuver was reckless, dangerous, and perfectly timed. Saladin's reserve force, mid-advance and stretched thin, suddenly found knights crashing into their exposed flank with unstoppable momentum. The shock was instantaneous. Cries of alarm, horses rearing, formations collapsing. Reynald's sword rose and fell like a butcher's cleaver, and his knights carved through the Muslim flank with brutal precision. Landry saw dust explode and heard distant steel. What is that?" The squire gasped, eyes wide. "Reinforcements. Our reinforcements." "No, not reinforcements. A trap." Baldwin had baited Saladin, forcing him to fully commit before unleashing a hidden hammer strike. For the first time in hours, hope sparked across the battlefield. Far above them, Baldwin whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Now the battle truly begins." Reynald's charge didn't just hit the Muslim flank. It detonated it. The sudden impact threw riders off balance, collapsing their formation before they could react. Dust exploded upward as steel crashed into bone and armor. What moments earlier looked like inevitable victory now twisted into panic. Saladin's commanders shouted orders, trying to reform ranks, but confusion spread faster than discipline. The reserve force, meant to finish the Crusaders, was now fighting for space, breath, survival. On the front line, Landry heard the shift before he understood it. The rhythm of the enemy changed. The pressure eased. The Mamluks no longer attacked with unified force. Now they hesitated, unsure whether to advance or retreat. His squire lifted his head. "Sir, they're falling back." Landry grinned behind his helm, a hard, savage expression. "No, they're thinking, and thinking is the first step to losing." A horn sounded, not Muslim but Christian, Baldwin's command. The entire line of knights began to move forward, slow and controlled, shields tight, swords ready. Not a desperate push, but a measured advance. Saladin's eyes followed that movement. For the first time that day, his calm expression cracked. "This king," he murmured. "He fights like a man with no fear of dying." An advisor replied, voice tight, "Then he is dangerous, because his men will become the same." Up on the ridge, Baldwin swayed in the saddle. Pain fogged his vision, but he refused to fall. His disease may have been eating his body, but the battlefield felt like the one place it could not touch his will. "Advance," he said again, quieter. But the words carried like thunder. The Crusaders pushed. Not fast, not wild, but inevitable, like a wall moving forward. The squire, breathing hard, whispered, "Sir, can we actually win?" Landry lifted his sword, eyes burning. If they bleed, they can break. And if they break, then today belongs to us. For the first time, the impossible felt reachable. Victory no longer a prayer, but a possibility. Saladin's army did not collapse. Not yet, but something more important happened. Their confidence cracked. The thunderous rhythm that had filled the valley shifted into uncertainty. Shouts replaced chants, and commanders scrambled to regain control. Reynald's cavalry carved through the flank and pulled back before being swallowed. A precise strike, not a reckless pursuit. Dust behind them marked where bodies and broken shields lay scattered like driftwood after a storm. On the main line, the Crusaders kept marching forward. Shields locked, horses steady, discipline unwavering. They didn't chase fleeing units. They held formation, squeezing Saladin's forces between fear and steel. Landry felt the shift like a change in weather. They're no longer attacking, his squire said, voice trembling with disbelief. No, Landry replied. They're reacting, and that means they've already lost the initiative. A wave of Muslim infantry surged forward, hoping to overwhelm with sheer numbers. Spears lowered, shields raised. The Crusader crossbowmen finally fired. Bolts snapped through the air with brutal accuracy. Point-blank range. No wind, no hesitation. Men fell in clusters, shields jolting from impact, lines collapsing. Then came the counterstrike. The infantry opened just enough space for the knights to surge through in small, precise wedges. Each wedge functioned like a blade, piercing, withdrawing, piercing again. Saladin watched the pattern, the timing, the unity, and realization dawned. This is not a desperate force, he said quietly. This is a trained killing machine. His generals exchanged glances. They fight like men who expect to die, one whispered. Saladin shook his head. No, they fight like men who refuse to. Below, Baldwin struggled to keep breathing, but his posture never faltered. His disease tore at his nerves, yet his voice carried across the battlefield. Forward, Jerusalem watches us. Landry lifted his shield and roared with the others. His squire echoed him, fear replaced by fire. For the first time, the great army of Islam felt hunted. And the smaller, bloodied, outnumbered force before them? They looked unstoppable. Saladin ordered one final gamble, a full concentrated strike on Baldwin himself. If the king fell, the knights would break. Every general knew this truth. Trumpets shrieked. A fresh contingent of heavy cavalry surged forward, elite Mamluks with black banners, their horses armored, their riders clad in layered lamellar and chain. They were not here to scatter infantry. They were here to kill a king. Landry saw the shift instantly. They're coming for his majesty. His squire's breath hitched. What do we do? Landry tightened his grip, eyes narrowing. We go through them. Baldwin noticed too. His horse trembled beneath him, sensing danger, but the king didn't retreat. He rode forward toward the threat, toward death. His marshal, Reynald, cursed. Reckless, stubborn child. Then he spat, smirked, and charged beside him. Fine, we'll make them choke on it. The impact was explosive. Shields collided. Horses crashed. Spears shattered. Baldwin's guard fought with the desperation of men witnessing destiny hinge on inches. An assassin broke through. Fast, silent, eyes locked on Baldwin. His curved blade flashed. Landry saw him, too far to intercept, too close to stop. The assassin lunged. Baldwin turned too slowly. His failing nerves, his numb limbs, betrayed him. The blade came down and collided with steel. Not Baldwin's, his squire's. The boy took the strike, full force, shield raised just high enough to deflect the killing blow. But the scimitar tore down his arm, ripping mail, flesh, tendon. Blood splattered across Baldwin's mask. The boy collapsed with a strangled gasp. Landry's roar tore from his chest, raw, animal. He slammed his sword through the assassin's helm with such force the blade stuck. Baldwin leaned down, voice strained, nearly breaking. You saved me. The squire tried to answer, but only managed a thin, trembling smile. Landry knelt beside him as the battle raged. "Stay awake," he whispered. "Stay with me." The squire's eyes fluttered, fading. Baldwin looked up, at Saladin's forces wavering, at his knights pushing forward, at the battlefield tipping. And with grief burning hotter than pain, he raised his sword one last time. "Now, drive them from this field." Every knight heard it. Every knight answered. And the line transformed from defense into unstoppable wrath. Something primal shifted across the valley. The Crusader line, once rigid and defensive, now surged forward with terrifying momentum. Not chaos, not rage, but cold purpose. Every rider who still had strength put it into the charge. Every wounded man who could stand rose. Every knight still breathing became a weapon. Saladin's cavalry saw them coming and hesitated. That hesitation was fatal. The Crusaders slammed into the Muslim vanguard like an avalanche of steel. Shields crumpled. Horses toppled. Men were crushed under hooves and mailed fists. The front ranks didn't retreat. They folded, broken before they understood the shift. Landry fought with a clarity he'd never known. Every strike felt inevitable. Every block, every counter, every movement was instinct sharpened by loss. His sword rose and fell in brutal repetition, his rage quiet, focused. Not for victory, but for the bleeding boy behind him. The squire was alive, barely, clutching his arm, face pale, whispering prayers between labored breaths. "Sir," he croaked, "are we winning?" Landry didn't look back. "We're finishing." Saladin's officers rallied their troops, screaming commands, trying to stabilize the line. But fear spreads faster than orders. Units began pulling back, then pushing back, then running. And once the first men fled, the rest followed. Even elite cavalry cannot stand when formation dissolves into survival. Saladin stared. Not furious, not shocked, but deeply, painfully aware. "It is over," he murmured. One of his commanders looked at him in disbelief. "We still have numbers." "Numbers are nothing," Saladin replied. "If hearts have already left the field." Down below, Baldwin still rode forward. His body was failing. Every nerve aflame, every muscle stiff, but his will held him upright. Dust coated his mask, his armor, his cloak, but his eyes burned with something stronger than pain. His knights parted around him, forming a final advancing wedge. Forward, relentless, Reynauld raised his sword high. No mercy for those who would give us none. But Baldwin stopped him with one quiet word. "Enough!" And just like that, the killing slowed. Bodies fell silent. The dust settled. The field belonged to Jerusalem. Against all logic, all numbers, all expectation, 700 had broken 35,000. Not with strength, but with resolve. Silence arrived slowly. Not peace, but the kind of silence battlefields know. Heavy, breathless, filled with the echo of what no longer lives. The dust hung thick in the air like smoke from an extinguished inferno. Horses paced nervously, hooves crunching over broken shields, shattered arrows, and bodies that would never rise again. Baldwin swayed in his saddle. His vision blurred at the edges, his nerves aflame, but he refused to fall. Reynauld reached a hand toward him. "Majesty!" Baldwin shook his head. "Not yet." He rode forward into the field his men had bled to defend. The true cross standard followed behind him, carried by a monk whose habit was soaked in blood that wasn't his. On the ground, Landry knelt beside his squire. The boy's face was pale, lips trembling as though clinging to life one heartbeat at a time. "You held," Landry whispered. "You stood when others would have run. Whatever happens now, you earned your place among us." The squire's voice was thin, barely more than breath. Did God want me to be brave?" Landry closed his eyes. The truth was complicated, always had been. So he answered the only honest way he could. "I think God wanted witnesses, and today you were one." Nearby, other knights searched for wounded, whispering final prayers over dying comrades. Some wept openly, exhaustion dissolving armor harder than steel. Saladin watched from a distance, not chased, not mocked. Baldwin refused pursuit. The battle was over. Humiliation was unnecessary. A messenger approached Saladin. "Shall we regroup and strike again, my sultan?" Saladin studied the Crusader line. Still tight, still disciplined, still standing like a wall forged in faith and despair. "No," he said softly. "There is no breaking men who have already accepted death." The messenger bowed his head. Baldwin finally halted his horse. His voice, weak but steady, carried across the wounded earth. "Remember this day, not for victory, but for what it cost." Some knights lowered their heads. Others clenched fists. A few simply stared into the quiet distance, unsure whether to feel pride or grief, because triumph always demanded payment. And the field had already taken more than enough. The sun dipped lower, and somewhere beyond the fading thunder of war, as dusk swallowed the valley, torches flickered to life among the living. The battlefield was no longer a place of motion, only memory. The scent of blood clung to the wind, mixed with crushed grass and burnt leather. Crows circled overhead, patient and silent, as if waiting for permission. Baldwin finally dismounted. His legs nearly buckled, and 2 Templars rushed to steady him. He waved them off. "Help the wounded," he rasped. He walked alone through armor, torn banners, and fallen enemies. A king among ghosts. His mask hid his rotting face, but not the grief behind his eyes. Reynald approached, wiping blood from his blade. "A decisive victory," Reynald said. "The kind that will echo." Baldwin didn't answer. Instead, he stared at a dead boy in worn armor, not more than 16. A Muslim fighter, scimitar still locked in his stiffening hand. Baldwin knelt beside him, removed a cloak, and covered the body. Reynald frowned. "He was our enemy." Baldwin's voice was low, steady. "He was someone's son." Reynald had no answer. Across the field, Landry knelt while surgeons worked on his squire. The boy trembled but breathed. When he saw Baldwin approach, he struggled to sit straighter. "My king," he whispered. Baldwin removed his glove, exposing a withered, scarred hand, and placed it gently on the boy's shoulder. "You did what many seasoned men cannot," Baldwin said. "You placed duty above fear." Tears filled the boy's eyes. "Was it worth it?" he asked, not as a soldier but as a person. Baldwin looked out across the valley, at the cost carved into the earth. His answer came slowly. "Victory is never worth the dead," he said. "But losing would have damned the living." Night settled fully, cool, quiet, indifferent. Priests sang mournful hymns. Knights prayed in exhaustion. The wounded cried out as surgeons stitched and cauterized their futures. Saladin's army vanished into the darkness, not defeated forever, only delayed. And Baldwin, young, sick, dying king, stood among his men one last moment before withdrawing into the shadows of his own fate. History would remember the numbers, the miracle, the impossible triumph. But those who survived knew a deeper truth. Glory and sorrow walk the same path, and victory always demands a piece of the soul.